Welcome back to Alyssa's Movie Takes. I'm going to jump into my full review for episode 7 of The Chosen Season 2. Here we go. All right, let me start off this time with what I didn't like, because there's more that I liked than I didn't like in this episode. And I'm going to start with the fish jokes. I do not know why they revived the sardine joke poorly from last season. The first time I heard that joke when Nicodemus made it, I didn't realize it was a joke, and then I was like, oh, okay. And then for them to bring it back in a really cheesy way of saying it, and having SHMUEL do it, it was just like, oh, please. I mean, I get that this is maybe a small fish town, and there's not a lot of things to joke about, except maybe fish and sardines. That said, I didn't even like the QUINTUS metaphor with the fish, because it took me a little bit of time to get what he meant with flesh versus bone as he was doing it, but I'm probably in the minority there. But I did find it interesting that they had a lot of fish metaphors and jokes in this episode, and I thought it was a little cheesy. Anyway, speaking of SHMUEL making jokes, one other thing that I didn't like about this entire season is how much screen time SHMUEL is getting. When Dallas and Brandon Potter, who plays Quintus, were talking after episode 7, they talked about how they didn't want to portray Quintus as just like your typical stock heel. And Quintus isn't. He's one of the better chosen characters, and he actually adds some level of fear because you just know how brutal this man is, but he comes across as witty and it works, and we'll talk about his return in the second part of this review. But SHMUEL comes across to me, and his little cohort, whose name I don't even know, that is first seen by the Pool of Bethesda, they just seem like stock heels. Just constantly having the same delivery of the same lines, and it's just coming across as whiny. And when they sort of showed up to the Roman soldiers to see if they could question Jesus, you just sort of feel like, as the audience member, that I kind of have the same reaction that these Roman soldiers have. It's just like, get away from me now. Because there's so much screen time for them, I think it weakens their chances to tell more of the disciples' stories, so that this great episode where there's a lot of tension between them would have been playing out a little bit better and more over the course of the whole season, rather than just in glimpses and moments. The other thing that I thought was a bit of a missed opportunity was the Lord's Prayer. They played the Lord's Prayer in a moment where Jesus had been arrested, comes back. Instead of telling his disciples that he's back, he goes off to pray first, which is an interesting choice by Dallas. And then it's after Jesus comes back that he starts to teach them the Lord's Prayer, but they start to pull away. So it takes you out of that moment. Because there had been so much bickering amongst the disciples and their personalities coming out as they fought, and they were really concerned about Jesus, who was let off in handcuffs, I again think that they shouldn't have pulled back, that we should have been able to stay in that moment and have more reaction afterwards, that maybe the disciples start to see, wow, this really is powerful. And to have that teachable moment and then just start to pull back took me out of it. And I wanted to be right there in it with them, because they were all reeling still at this idea that Jesus could be arrested. And I was thinking about going into whether or not that choice to have Jesus go off to pray before he comes back to his disciples after the arrest is the right one. But I'll ask you the question. Do you think that that was just a director's choice? Would Jesus have just come right back? Does it play off this idea that Jesus is kind of in his own world with his Father, and his disciples are there, but his concern isn't primarily for them. His concern is primarily for the mission. What do you think about that? I'm going to phrase that as a question. What do you think about that? Would Jesus' concern have been primarily for his mission, and then the disciples' thoughts and emotions and feelings were secondary? Or would he have wanted to include his disciples in his thought process and decision making as much as possible? Open question. All right, so they pulled back, so it took me out of that scene. So those are the things that I was wanting to see changed or tweaked in this episode. And now I'll talk about what I really liked about this, which is I loved the bigger scope. I still don't think we've made up for some of the other episodes where it was just very episodic, but at least we're starting to see some pieces come together. And each of the disciples sort of has their moment in this episode, and what you can accomplish through some of these fight scenes amongst them is their personalities coming out. Now, one of the things that I also really liked about this episode of bringing back old characters is Gaius's concern for Matthew when he first gets to the camp. I really liked that Gaius was was looking at Jesus going, what are you doing? Matthew is used to eating well. Like, I thought you were going to take care of him. And I like that hint from the first season of how much Gaius really cared about Matthew, and it was his job and his duty to protect this man. I mean, that was his sole duty. And now he's coming to the camp and he's seeing that Matthew is, underfed and a wanderer, and it just does not compute. And that was a great moment of characterization. It was also great to have Quintus come back. As I said, Brandon Potter tries to play him with a lot of nuance, that he's a very brilliant man who rose through the ranks by merit, not by nepotism. And he keeps a tight town. Like, Capernaum is not a town in trouble like other towns. He has a tight rein on keeping control and keeping order. And what I said in my quick reaction is that Rome doesn't see Jesus as much of a threat early on as the Jews do. The Jews pretty much see him as a threat. The Jewish leaders see him as a threat right away. Those religious leaders, they see him as a threat right away because of how he's directly confronting them with what they say is the law and what Jesus says is what his rights are as the Son of Man and who he says he is. Rome isn't as threatened because they were a people that could see human nature pretty well, that in order to keep order, you have to have some level of diversion, and you have to an interest, and that the people need to sort of be able to keep their own practices. So while Quintus sees that he might become a threat if he sort of stands up and challenges Rome, he doesn't see him as a major threat because he doesn't see him as a political figure. Like, he sits down with him and he in his mind goes, this is not a political figure. Not a political figure, no threat to me politically, not violent, disarms, he's disarmed a zealot, he's not politically violent. So that initially says to Rome, okay, he's not violent, he does these magic tricks, okay, magician, as long as you don't threaten Rome, we're going to let you go. And Jesus makes no promises. But I like that they're playing off of, they probably were aware of who Jesus was, the Romans, and that he would draw a crowd. But because he just sort of seemed like a magician to them and maybe a showman, they're like, all right, well, it's going to give the people a distraction. That's, like how they have after school programs so that kids don't get violent on the street. All right, Jesus can be your after school program. We'll just let him be that. That was great. Again, you're showing more personality in the disciples. I think Andrew's reaction, as I said in my first review, of him having this like really big, scary blow up and having sort of this temper tantrum that he's dealing with a lot and it's coming out as anger. Yes, was it overreaction? Yeah. But would that character probably overreact to this situation? Yes, because the two men that he loves the most, John the Baptist and now Jesus, are under threat from Herod and from Rome and from Jewish leaders. And he's trying to kind of keep his world in order. And again, open question. So the disciples in this episode are pretty much a hot mess. And do you think that that's biblically accurate? Were the disciples at this point in time, early in Jesus' ministry, were they a hot mess? And is it good to show them as a hot mess? And how would you show them if you didn't show it like this, with them fighting all the time? How would you show it? So yeah, that's just an open question of, these kids sound like 4-year-olds in the back seat. But have you ever been on a road trip with 4-year-olds in the back seat? Like, it doesn't take that long for people who are smushed into a hard and squished environment to start fighting. So I do think that that's accurate. And you do see a little bit more of their personality coming out and the concern that both the women have for Mary Mother as Jesus is arrested. I thought that all that was welcome because it really sort of enhanced the episode. This episode expands the scope, going right into our season finale. So in that, I liked it. I am still longing for some more of those character arcs from the first season. So I hope that in season 3, we get to bring back more of it where it's really more braided all the way along instead of just little hints here and there of character growth. But all in all, pretty good episode. Looking forward to what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you again soon.